What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with the most anticipated video for all of you guys every year as we're in the holiday season, which means end of the year lists are becoming prevalent as we are basically done with the year in terms of like major releases. So I figured it's now time, high time I should say, to give out my top 50 albums of 2025. Yeah, I've expanded the list this year just because, man, this year had so many killer releases. Probably tougher to put this list together than it was last year when I did just 40. But this year I'm doing 50. So yeah, the first time I've done a 50 list since 2022, I believe. Something like that. But yeah, these were, in my opinion, the 50 albums that really captured 2025 in terms of metal in a big, big way. But of course, before I talk about the list in general, let's go ahead and talk about what were some of the big, like, movements in terms of metal, like genres that kind of reigned supreme this year. Well, it was kind of scattered across the board this year, but I would say the genre that I felt shined through the best in 2025 was thrash, which is a nice refresher considering thrash to me was kind of quiet over the past few years. Like, there wasn't that many huge thrash releases or thrash releases that really caught my attention. This year there were quite a lot of thrash albums that really stood out. A lot of them you're going to hear about later on. Other styles, prog kind of had a big boost this year, especially with the release of one album that I'll be talking about a little bit later. And actually another prog giant releasing something absolutely fantastic. And I would say perhaps like extreme prog as well was a pretty big thing this year. Like, there was quite a lot of extreme prog metal that kind of shined through. Some of it didn't make the list, but came close to making the list. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the top 50 albums of 2025. Coming at number 50, we have Behemoth with The Shit of God. Despite the cringy title, album itself has been the best thing Behemoth has done since The Satanist, and it also feels like a return a little bit back to the middle era, like the 2000s era of Behemoth, but mixing it with The Satanist. And again, despite the cringe, the album itself musically was fantastic. No complaints otherwise. Number 49, we have Dehuman Reign with Dawn of a Malefic Dominion. Just a gnarly, nasty album, all things considered, and definitely one that I feel more people should pay attention to, and that's why it made the list. Number 48, we have Hazard with The Third Dimension. This was an early release. I think this was probably the earliest album I have on the list. This was all the way back in January, and this album was just modern thrash done with an old school twist, and I definitely see this band making waves in the future if they continue their consistency. Number 47, we have Sphere with Inferno. So this was also the year arguably of like Polish extreme metal, particularly death metal, and this album certainly was up there amongst some of the best material in terms of Polish metal in recent memory. Number 46, we have Celestial Scourge with Observes of the Inevitable. This was a debut offering, and this is Stian and Sindre from Blood Red Throne. This is their more brutal tech death project, and it definitely delivers on both subgenres in a big way. Moments that remind you of Nile, moments that remind you of Suffocation, Dying Fetus, especially Cryptopsy, but done by a bunch of Norwegian dudes, and they absolutely killed it. Number 45, we have Violator with Unholy Retribution. This one was one that got a late review, but it was well worth it. These modern Brazilian thrash titans just unleashed unbelievable hell with this album, just being as furious and fast and ferocious as it was. And that's why it made the list. Number 44, we have Dormant Ordeal with Tooth and Nail, kind of going back a little bit to, if I remember right, I believe this is another Polish release. And if I can remember, I believe it was either this or Sphere excuse me, that I described as like Behemoth from the 2000s, but with more dissonance. I can't remember off the top of my head because both albums are pretty similar, but Dormant Ordeal I actually really enjoyed for just how absolutely evil it sounded. Number 43, we have Sodom with the Arsonist. If this is going to be the final Sodom album we get, then this was a really good farewell album. But if it turns out it's just a hiatus and they come back with something else, I look forward to hearing it. But for now, we got this killer offering, which, yeah, can be interchangeable with a couple of the previous albums. But again, Sodom just remains arguably the most consistent thrash band in Germany, and this album certainly proved it. Number 42, Malefic Throne with the Conquering Darkness. So this is a late bloomer that I just reviewed not too long ago. It's a supergroup with Gene Palabicki, Steve Tucker, John Longstreth, and they just come out with this thrashy old school death metal album. And I hope we get another full length from this supergroup sometime in the near future because I could see this band making it in a big way. Number 41, Death Hammer with Crimson Dawn. These Norwegian blackened thrash speedsters come back with a new album, and I would argue better than Electric Warfare, their previous album, as this one definitely brings in a little bit more like classic heavy metal nods, but still retaining who they are. Kind of like if you took Creator or Sodom or Destruction, but they were from Norway instead of Germany. That's about what this album is all about. It's just raw, nasty, speedy, blackened thrash. Number 40, we have Nailed to Obscurity with Generation of the Void. This is a really, really strong offering from this German band, and I feel this band doesn't get enough love, and I think this album, if you're looking to get into this band, this would be a good one to start with, because while they're described as melodic death doom, I feel like this album in particular, they kind of go for a bit more of a progressive melodic death metal feel, because not as much doom on here. It's definitely going for more lush, dynamic songwriting, which I definitely would associate with prog, and this album just delivers on everything and then some. Excuse me. Number 39, we have Ghost with Skeleta. Some people might be shocked this isn't higher on the list. It's lower on the list because, again, I had to make choices, but this was an awesome album from Ghost, yet another killer release from this band. Say what you want about Ghost, but you can't ignore that Tobias and his Nameless Ghouls, they just know how to write great songs. And this album certainly continues that path of Ghost becoming one of the biggest bands in the world, not just metal, but bands in general. Excuse me again. But yeah, this album I thought was awesome. No complaints otherwise. Number 38, we have Lord Belial with Unholy Trinity. Basically picking up from where they left off with their last album, but expanding on it perhaps a little bit by adding maybe a little bit more death metal vibes, but not entirely. It's still very much black metal with more of a melodic touch. So basically, if you loved Dissection or Sacramentum, like that kind of hybrid of mellow death and black metal, but with much more black metal laced, this album is definitely a good one to start with if you want to get into Lord Belial. Number 37, we have Flames with Frequency of Illusion. This was another recent release, and this album basically continues what I was talking about with the Hazard album. Just thrash really shined this year, and this album from a Greek legend, despite their ties early on black metal, they have become just a straight up thrash band. And this almost sounds like, I believe I described it in the review, excuse me, like Greek Metallica and Slayer, like kind of like that, but much more, I would say, Metallica than Slayer in terms of like the downstroke riffs and just the energy behind it. But yeah, this album certainly kicked ass, and it definitely deserved to be on the list. Number 36, we have Despised Icon with Shadow Work. Yes, a deathcore album made the list, but this album is more than just deathcore. Like, there are definitely moments of, like, brutal death metal and technical death metal. Hell, even a little melodic death metal that just happens to have some hardcore grooves and breakdowns. So, yeah, this album certainly picks up from where they were at with their previous album, Purgatory, but I think this blows Purgatory out of the water, and in fact, this might be one of their best albums, maybe. I don't know, this band's been very consistent since the beginning, so yeah, kind of tough to say, but still, killer album from one of the only deathcore bands I actually do enjoy listening to. Number 35, we have Titan Blood from the Visceral Abyss. Yeah, some more raw black and death metal from Spain right here, and this album was just ferocious, evil, dark, murky, and nasty. Basically, the best word to describe this album is absolutely nasty. Like, the riffs are just all over the map in terms of mood. The drumming is absolutely bonkers, and the vocals are just absolutely unhinged. So yeah, I definitely need to dig more from this band, but this album was definitely a great gateway, and it should be a good gateway for you too. Number 34, we have Unleashed, Fire Upon Your Lands, the legends from Sweden, the Swedish death metal legends. And yeah, despite their inconsistency, this album is, I would say, up there amongst one of the best Unleashed albums, at least that I know about. Like, I would put this up there toe-to-toe with the debut. I thought it was that fucking strong. Like, if you've been a fan of Amon Amarth but haven't been digging their more recent output and you want to hear something a little more refreshing and a little more old school, I think Unleashed, this album in particular, would definitely get you on board. Number 34, we have Castle Rat with The Bestiary. So one of the better Doom metal albums this year. Is this year for Doom kind of a slow year, at least in my opinion, but this album stands above most of them for just how catchy it was and just how old school it sounded. Like, basically, if you took Black Sabbath, The Sword, Pentagram, hell, even Dio, and combined them with vocals that sound like Pat Benatar or Anik von Giersbergen, this is definitely something to check out. Like, it is as old school as it gets, catchy riffing, just solid performances across the board, and it's just fun. It's one of the most fun albums of the year for sure. Number 32, we have Hate with Bellum Regis. So if, say, you're a Behemoth fan that didn't perhaps dig Should Have Got as much as some people did, and you want to hear something that's a little more, well, a little less cringe, this is definitely something to check out, because Hate, basically, as most people would say, are doing Behemoth better than Behemoth right now, and actually expanding on black and death metal by adding, again, some more dissonance and retaining the core of who they are as a band. And this would maybe be up there amongst one of the best Hate albums, some people could argue, but still, killer offering, but it is my 32. Number 31, we have Benediction with Ravage of Empires. Long story short, this is just meat and potatoes, old school death metal done very well. I mean, Dave Ingram showcases why he's such an underrated vocalist with his "Brrr!" And musically, it's just basically everything I love about old school death metal. Catchy riffs, awesome drumming, grooves, thrash. Just everything about this album screams death metal. And if you've been wanting to check out Benediction, this ain't a bad place to begin. Number 30, we have Empty Throne with Unholy. This band from South Dakota that features current and former members of other bands like Suffer and Angerot. This is their melodic blackened death metal project. Basically like if Immortal was a blackened death metal band. That's the best way to describe it. I mean, hell, there's a killer cover of One by One by Immortal on here. And yeah, this just has some awesome melodic hooks, but it is dark, it is sinister. Yeah, this is definitely a band I feel all you guys should check out, especially if you like the other projects of the members of this band, Angerot and Suffer. Yeah, give it a listen. It's really, really killer. Number 29, we have Deftones with Private Music. despite me not being the world's biggest Deftones fan, this album was certainly catchy and fun. Now, whether or not people say they're a metal band is irrelevant. I think they are a metal band, just alternative metal. Like if you took alt rock and metal and mixed it together, that's Deftones. And this album definitely has heavy moments that are almost Meshuggah-esque. And Chino Marino showing to everyone that while he's a damn good singer, he can croon the panties off of almost every woman I know and maybe one dude I know. I'm not going to name names. But still, yeah, this album, it was just a nice, smooth journey of just great songwriting. That's really all I have to say. Number 28, we have Dream Theater with Parasomnia. So this kind of ties into what I was talking about with prog kind of shining this year, and largely it was because this was the first album in 16 years since Mike Portnoy was in the band. And you can definitely tell Portnoy is back because he definitely had a hand in songwriting. And I think this is the best Dream Theater album we've had since arguably Octavarium or even Train of Thought. Like, if I were to do my Dream Theater ranking again, this would be around the middle of the discography, because this was a really good album. Regardless of how you feel about James LaBrie, I think he still puts on a solid vocal performance on here, but musically, it's Dream Theater through and through, and this is Dream Theater done exceptionally well. Definitely deserved a spot. Number 27, we have Sacrifice with Volume 6. So this was a comeback release, and unlike the Dark Angel album, this was a comeback release done right. And I've not been the world's biggest Sacrifice fan just because I haven't really dove too far into their catalog. But this album is definitely like a good introductory point, and this album was just absolutely ferocious, furious, as thrash should be. And this could be considered like Canadian Slayer. Then again, Razor might have something to say about that. But still, this album, it was just all killer, no filler, no complaints otherwise. This was a fantastic thrash comeback. Number 26, we have Amorphous with Borderland. I know this one's kind of divisive amongst metalheads. Most people loved it, some thought it was just there. I still enjoy Amorphous albums, and this album, while yeah, it's not really changing much, do they really need to? As long as they continue writing catchy melodies, catchy hooks, catchy riffs, awesome vocal hooks, what more do you want from this band? Like, what more do you want? This album just shows that Amorphous are one of the most consistent bands in the history of music, not just metal, but music in general, as they show no signs of slowing down, and I can't wait to hear what they're going to be doing next. Excuse me. But we are now halfway through the list, 25 down, 25 to go. And before I get into that, drink. Oops, I've spilled. I feel like I'm getting tipsy, even though I don't drink alcohol. But regardless. Number 25, we have Biohazard with Divided We Fall, continuing the trend of comeback albums. This was an unexpected one. I actually almost forgot about this album until I made a last-second decision to review this instead of Tribal Gaze. I think it was Tribal Gaze, I forget. But yeah, I was so glad I made that choice because this album was a banger through and through. These New York groove metal, hardcore, crossover legends, and the first album in many years with Evan Seinfeld as the frontman. And you can definitely tell this has an old school, early 90s groove metal, metallic hardcore feel, as man, these songs just are powerful and just pack a punch. Especially the opening track, Fuck the System, like just punches you right in the face. But yeah, Biohazard, keep on keeping on. Down for life. Brooklyn, New York hardcore. Number 24, we have November's Doom with Major Arcana. Yeah, this was an unexpected one for me because I've not checked out much November's Doom, I am glad I listened to this because this was one of the best death doom albums of the year. I would say it almost borders on melodic death metal at times too, but with some really cool, clean vocals. Paul Kerr, such an underrated vocalist and musician all around, and seeing that he's a big nerd for Star Wars, I could definitely see well, even though I'm not a Star Wars guy, but in terms of like nerdy stuff, I feel like if I were to somehow get him on Horseman Podcast one day, it'd be a fun conversation for damn sure. And musically, this album, if you love like the Peaceville bands, plus like Swallow the Sun, check this out. This is awesome, awesome stuff. Number 23, we have Rivers of Nile with their self-titled. Yes, this kind of gets back into like extreme prog, even though this is also like tech death too. But yeah, this album was just unreal. Like, the songwriting is all over the map, but again, you get some catchy hooks. Plus, adding Andy Thomas from Black Crown Initiate on guitars and doing the clean vocals definitely added a big boost, because I've always been a fan of Andy's guitar work and vocal work. I think he added new life to this band, considering that some people didn't care for the work, but this was like, I would almost say this is like Where Owls Know My Name Part 2, but maybe trying out some different ideas. But yeah, this was fun, and there you have it. Number 22, we have Gruesome with Silent Echoes, a.k.a. Death Human 2. I mean, despite it being a tribute to death, it's still done in their own style. Like Matt Harvey, Robin Mason, Gus Rios, I think, still the drummer, and Daniel Gonzalez just come together to create a great fitting album that would have been perfect after Human in 1991. Like, the production's similar, the musical performance is similar, maybe not as technical, but more proggy than you would expect. But it does make me wonder, are they going to go for an individual thought pattern style with the next Gruesome album we get, which hopefully we don't have to wait long for that. But still, despite it being essentially an homage and tribute to Chuck, this was still an awesome album, no complaints. Number 21, we have Castrator with Coronation of the Grotesque. These badass ladies of death metal, back to Robin Mason again, but also Carol, Clarissa, Sarah. Just all four of these ladies just show that, hey, ladies can do old school death metal just as well as the guys can. And this is like if you took Suffocation, Cannibal Corpse, another band I'm going to be talking about later, but also like later era death, mashed it together. You get this album. Like, Clarissa is a vocalist, she is feral. Carol is a drummer, she is unbelievably wild. Robin continuing her consistency on bass, and then Sarah showcasing some amazing guitar work, not only in the riffs but in the leads. As you can definitely tell, she seems pretty inspired by Chuck Schuldiner. But yeah, this album, unbelievable old school death metal. But word to the wise, watch your balls. Now we're into the top 20. Kicking off at number 20, we have Between the Buried and Me with The Blue Nowhere. This almost went up higher on the list, and almost wish I could put it up higher, but man, just this year it just had so much competition. But this album, for prog metal, one of the best releases of the year. Although I would argue this is one of the more bonkers prog metal albums I've heard this year, or prog death metal albums, you could argue, as Tommy and the boys just continuing to be consistent ever since Alaska, just been at the top of their game. And this album certainly shows that they show no signs of slowing down or changing really at all in terms of who they are at their core. And this album certainly proved that, and then some. Number 19, we have Sepulchral Curse with Crimson Moon Evocations. This one I was not expecting to be as awesome as it was, considering it was my first time listening to this band. But from Finland, basically if you took Sulphur Aeon but added a little bit more melody to it. Like, it's still super duper heavy, but man, the melodies that shine on here were just otherworldly. And I definitely need to check out more from this band. So again, this is one of those cases of, if you had a really good entry point to start with for a new band, this would be one for Sepulchral Curse. And I can't wait to hear what they have in store next, because I am now a massive fan of this band, considering how killer this album was. Number 18, we have Rune Magic with Cycle of the Dying Sun, Dawn of Ashen Realms. One of the stronger Death Doom albums, and this is straight up Death Doom, like not melodic Death Doom or gothic Death Doom. If anything, this kind of leans a little bit close to like Bolt Thrower at times. But yeah, this is still just murky, dark Death Doom, very much akin to Hooded Menace, which, by the way, I'll talk more about that here when I get into the top 10. But anyways, one of the stronger Death Doom albums of the year is Death Doom this year was, like, it was there, but not as prevalent as it's been in years past, but there was definitely a lot of great Death Doom, and this was one of the best ones for sure. Number 17, continuing on the thrash train, we have The Haunted with Songs of Last Resort. Man, this album just absolutely punches you right in the face, verbally and musically, and sonically, and literally, figuratively, every adjective you can think of. Yeah, this Swedish supergroup just continuing to prove that, hey, thrash ain't dead, even though there's definitely some death metal and melodeath moments that creep in here. It's still very much thrash at its core, and this album was just, again, a big face puncher. And definitely in a year where thrash certainly shined, this one was one of the ones that shined the brightest. Excuse me. Number 16, we have Leak with Necro. So this would be up there amongst the best old school death metal albums of the year, even though this is a modern band. I mean, if you love old school Swedish death metal like Bloodbath, Entombed, Dismember, Grave, Carnage, Unleashed, this is basically that, but I would say this leans definitely close between like Bloodbath and Dismember, with some Entombed thrown in there. But yeah, it's basically Thomas, who was in Bloodbath. I don't think he's in the band now, but yeah, this was just a fun, nasty Necro album. So yeah, definitely this year when it came to like HM2 death metal, kind of lacked, but this was definitely the strongest out of all of them. Number 15, we have Cryptopsy with An Insatiable Violence. I liked As Gamora Burns. I thought that was a killer album. This album blows As Gamora Burns out of the water, and in fact, this is probably the best Cryptopsy album since None So Vile. Like, musically, it's back to being brutal and unhinged. While, yeah, production can be an issue with how clean it sounds, at least the performances back up that production in a big way. Because Matt definitely showing that he's fine, or not, I shouldn't say finally, but he's really showing off his vocal prowess. Flo Monnier still proving why he's one of the best drummers in death metal. And everybody else just puts on the performance of a lifetime. Yeah, so Cryptopsy, keep on keeping on. Number 14, we have Scour with Gold. This was an early release. I believe this was back in March. But yeah, Phil Anselmo and members of Misery Index, Cattle Decapitation, and Agoraphobic Nosebleed just come together to create maybe the best black metal album of the year. I don't know. I do have one more that will be coming up pretty soon that would maybe take that crown. Or actually two more. But yeah, this one, in terms of like more evil, brutal black metal, this is definitely the best in terms of that. In terms of that subset. Like, basically, if Marduk and Dark Funeral like stepped up their game. Maybe not so much Marduk, more Dark Funeral. But yeah, Phil, this was one of his best vocal performances of his career, showing he has unbelievable death metal roars and black metal scream. And of course, everybody else. Adam Jarvis on drums. Holy hell. But yeah, killer album at number 14. Number 13, we have Seor with Amidst the Ruins. Man, this is one of the most beautiful sounding albums of the year for like an atmospheric black metal slash folk metal band or one man project, as I believe it's Andy Marshall. He showcases a lot of talent on here in terms of his guitar work, his vocals. I forget who did the drums on this, but the drums were awesome. But the hooks, the melodies, the folk aspect just comes together in a beautiful way. And if I was to have made a top 10 songs of the year, the song Rebirth would have been a top contender because that 14-minute opus was just unbelievably beautiful and fun, and it takes you on a journey. But yeah, definitely give this album a shot. Number 12, we have Paradise Lost with Ascension. So we're back to Death Doom again, or in this case, we're at Gothic slash melodic Death Doom. But yeah, this album just basically perfectly encompasses everything Paradise Lost has been or ever will be, with evil sounding growls, great like soothing melodic vocals, and the James Hetfield style gruff singing that I appreciate, but on top of great doomy riffs, awesome melodies and harmony. I mean, Paradise Lost continuing to prove why they're one of the kings of this side of metal, the more darker side of metal. Number 11, we have An Abstract Illusion with The Sleeping City. This almost made it higher on the list, but when I was going through it, I put it down to 11, mainly only because the only complaint I did have was maybe I wish the guitars could have been a bit more prominent in the mix, but aside from that, musically, it's still wonderful. It's awesome progressive death metal with vocals that are just unreal, whether it be on the clean side or on the gruff side. And musically, as I will keep saying, they're almost like a hybrid of Opeth and BT Bam, especially on this album, but also incorporating a lot more atmosphere. So, yeah, while I don't think it's as strong as Woe, it's still a fantastic album for damn sure. So, now we're into the top 10. And before I go into the top 10, I do want to make mention of a couple of albums that barely missed the cut that I thought about putting on, but decided against at the last minute. The new Hooded Menace didn't make it. But if this was a top 60, it would have. Same goes for Whitechapel. Same goes for Lunar. And the same would even go for, say... I did have another one off the top of my head and I lost it. But you get the idea. There were quite a lot that barely missed the cut. So that's why this list was a little bit difficult to put together. But with that being said, and after this being done... Now it's time for the top 10. These were the 10 albums that I feel perfectly encapsulated this year musically. Number 10, Blood Red Throne with Silkskin. I know this was the most recent album, but man, it's still a fucking vicious onslaught of death metal. And I think this one, like I said, was better than Nonagon. Kind of on par with Imperial Congregation, although this one, I would say, definitely gets a little more brutal. But man, the melodies, especially in the lead melodies, really shine on here. And with this being the second album for Sindre Johnson under his belt, I feel like he got more comfortable on this album vocally than he was on Nonagon. But musically, I feel like this was a massive step up. Like, it gets back to who Blood Red Throne truly are at their core, and that's amazing meat and potatoes, old school, almost brutal death metal. But, yeah, my boys from Norway just came back in a big way with this one, and just... bleh, just made me want to go bleh. Number 9, we have In Mourning with The Immortal. This, in terms of like progressive death metal, this was the best work of the year. Like, In Mourning, as I keep saying, are basically like what would happen if you mixed old Opeth and Insomnium. Like, you get the mellow death vibes of, like, Insomnium, but with the progressive style of Opeth. And it just comes together into something that's just beautiful, somber, dark, but also somehow energetic, but still plenty of heaviness. Plenty of heaviness. Like Staghorn, that song as a whole basically describes this album all the way through. But yeah, if you have not listened to In Mourning, this would be a great starting point as well, and then go back through the rest of their catalog. Number 8, we have Revocation with New Gods, New Masters. If somebody were to ask me what would be the best Revocation album, you can make an argument for this album, and you wouldn't be wrong, because this album was perfect. This was a perfect mix of everything that Revocation is all about, mixing in some technical death metal brutality, but with the riffing and aggression of thrash. Like, this was another big thrash release, even though it's thrash meets tech death, it's still thrash. And this album was just absolutely insane, and with all the different vocal guests, like especially the track with Travis Ryan, man, that one was just vicious and otherworldly. But yeah, this album, again, Revocation being another one of the most consistent bands out there, and again, I look forward to more. Number 7, probably in my opinion the best black metal album of the year, Black Braid with Black Braid 3. John, or I can't remember his stage name he's going under, but man, he is showing why he is one of the most talented musicians out there in terms of black metal. And while some people want to discredit this band or project, I feel like they should get more respect and love from even the die-hard black metal fans, because some people describe this as starter black metal. While that's somewhat true, I still think this album definitely perfectly encapsulates everything black metal has to offer, and perhaps then some. Just great riffs, great songwriting, the vocals are there, the production, I think, definitely fits the style. It may not sound like Fisher-Price instruments recorded in a fucking mailbox, but I would rather listen to something like this than, say, a Burzum album. I am dead serious. But yeah, this album, I still am trying to get a physical copy of it. I need to get all of their stuff, but this album, I think, might be the best thing that this project has ever done. Number 6, my first 5 out of 5 review this year, Warbringer with Wrath and Ruin. Back to the thrash we go, and this one was absolutely incredible. Like, definitely a slightly more different sounding Warbringer album, mainly in the guitar tone. Like, it's going from E flat down to D. But they were able to come up with some hyper aggressive songs, but also bringing in some really strong melody into the mix. I mean, everything about this album is some of the reasons why I loved thrash as a teenager, and why I still love it to this day. And despite it being one of those revival bands, Warbringer show that in terms of the revival bands of like the mid to late 2000s, they've been the most consistent. They may not be my favorite out of the bunch, but they're very close. It's definitely between them and Evil for me, but I will argue Warbringer has been more consistent. And this album, I mean, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now we are into the top 5. Coming in at number 5, Innumerable Forms with Pain Effulgence. This one, in terms of like old school death doom, this was a huge release. My first time checking this band out, and wow, it is murky, it is sinister. It's like basically if you took Hooded Menace and mixed them with incantation. Like, there's a lot of incantation on here, particularly in like the faster parts where it gets into blast beats and low end tremolo. But the doom on here, I think, holds up next to like an old Hooded Menace album. But man, I just wasn't ready for just how dissonant and dark this album was going to get on me. But if you were to ask me what is the best old school Death Doom album of 2025, this would be a high pick, but there is one more coming up in a little bit that would probably give it a run for the money, even though it's a little bit different, or actually a lot different. But you'll understand when we get to it. Number 4, Coroner with Dissonance Theory. Going back to the trend of thrash, but also prog and comeback releases done right. This was a comeback album, long wait to happen, I should say. And this album made it worth the wait. 32 years. I wasn't even alive when their last album came out before this, but doesn't matter. This album, I would say even in terms of prog metal, this was the best album of the year. And I think this was 60% prog, 40% thrash. Like, it's not as thrashy as their previous works, but the thrash that's there is awesome. But I love this album for the songwriting. Like, definitely embracing more being just a progressive metal band that just happens to have a lot of thrash leaks. Basically like Voivod, only not as atonal, but more riff forward. Everybody delivered on this album and then some, and one would wonder, or hope, I should say, for another album to come out after this and see where they go from here. Number 3, Mesro with Embrace the Awakening. This was one of my most anticipated albums of the year, as I said in the review, because after I got into this band with their previous album, Summoned by Demons, just unbelievable, like, Bay Area inspired thrash from Sweden. Basically, if you love Testament, old Metallica, this is a band for you. But man, this album, like, the riffs are riffy as all get out, but the sneak attack was the melodies on this album. Like, great hooks, catchy riffing, awesome performances from everybody, and amazing production. Unbelievable production. And I know at some point I'm going to hopefully get to interview the frontman, Ulf, and that'll be a fun conversation, because this album, I don't know if I should say it blows Summoned by Demons out of the water. I'd say they're about equal, but with this album having just a little bit more in terms of hooks, it might be just a tiny bit better than Summoned by Demons, but not by much, because this album was phenomenal, just like Summoned by Demons. Now we are at the top 2. Number 2, 1914 with Verberus Unitas. After when when Fear and Weapons meet, hearing how immersed and somber and heavy and dark that album was, when I saw that this Ukrainian blackened death doom historic band was coming out with something new, I'm like, okay, let's see what they have in store here. As I even said in the review, this is like a perfect tale of two halves. The first half, just flat out vicious blackened death metal with some like great double time groove, basically describing like a World War I soldier that's ready to go to battle for his country. The second half, where it gets darker, it gets doomy, slower, and that's where the vibe of the horror behind all the blood and guts and the battle and everything involved in the war starts to set in, and you become traumatized. Just the immersion of this album was unlike anything else this year. And again, just the emotion behind it was just untouched. But unfortunately, it is just my number 2, because my number 1 album of 2025 should come as no surprise: Testament Parabellum. This album is probably the best album Testament has done since arguably Formation of Damnation. Production shift with going to Jens Bogren instead of Andy Sneap. And musically, so different from their previous few albums. Like, this album, kind of, like I said, it kind of perfectly amalgamates everything Testament has done, but I would argue this is the heaviest Testament album ever. Even heavier than Demonic, which I'm not a big fan of. But this album, like, it's basically taking who Testament are, bringing in some black metal and some death metal ideas to kind of just expand their sound. And of course, the songwriting is just unreal. Chuck Billy's vocals still deliver. Even though on this album, he's embracing a little bit more of his almost death metal side, but he still showcases that he's one of the most powerful vocalists in metal in general. I mean, top to bottom, every song killed. Even the ballad Meant to Be is one of my favorite songs of the year. But just how brutal this album would get at times. Like Infanticide, A.k.a. and For the Love of Pain. But also just how catchy it would get on, like, Infanticide, A.k.a., High Noon, Nature of the Beast, title track. I mean, everything about this album is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And judging from other people's thoughts on it, this has been one of the most acclaimed and well-received albums of the year, and for good reason. And also, despite a new drummer with Chris Dovas, he showcases he's here to stay for a while, because he unleashed on this one. But if you haven't jammed Testament in a while, come back with this one, because it is that damn good. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude 2025 in terms of metal. This year, while you did have a lot of stinkers, you had far more amazing material than bad material this year. Despite the tragedies we have had this year in metal, at least the music made up for it, because musically this was one of the strongest years in terms of reviews I have done. So many fantastic releases across the board in metal. And 2026 already, with the upcoming schedule we have, is already looking to be a huge year, considering a lot of the releases, which I'll be talking about in a video later this month. But anyways, that does it for this list. I want to know your guys' list. What are your favorite albums of 2025? Let me know in the comments below. But until next time, thank you all for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.